the decision on the scope of work with regard to comp photos should be the appraiser's.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach Podcast.
Minisode.
And welcome back to the program, everybody. Dustin Harris hanging out once again in the podcast chair. I want to remind you that we are sponsored by Anow Software. Anow is the software that I use to keep track of everything that goes on in my office. I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like in reality here in just a couple of minutes. But in the meantime, take your browser, go to anow.com. It's anow.com. And remember that you can get 30% off your first 3 months by using the coupon code podcast30. All right, folks, we're going to talk about it again. Comp photos, a favorite topic of everybody on this program. You know my feelings. They have not changed, but I did have a listener reach out to me, a good friend. We'll just call him Joe because that's his name. Joe, thanks for reaching out to me. I'm just going to read to you his comment. It was a bigger email, but I'm just going to read to you the paragraph that I think applies to this situation, and then we're going to talk about this. He says, Dustin, with the advent of the hybrid appraisal and the new 1004 form for hybrids that has been approved by HUD, FHA, et al., it is very apparent that the need for original comp photos has now become technically obsolete. Not only are original comp photos not required on the hybrids, but appraisers no longer have to even drive the neighborhood. It would be interesting to hear your thoughts regarding this change, i.e., if they don't need original photos for the hybrids, is it really necessary for the original photos for the standard appraisal report? The same lender/clients are accepting these reports as well. All of the arguments for requiring original photos just fall flat now. All right, Joe, first of all, I agree with 99.9% of everything that you're saying there. And I don't necessarily disagree with the 0.01% that I'm going to talk about now, but I would frame it just a little bit differently. And I'm going to talk about this today in the realm of scope of work. And that's really what we're talking about here. And, folks, if you are like me, and by the way, I started appraising in 1996, so that gives you a little bit of a context. If you're like me, you were raised on the 1004. You were raised on, form filling, if you will. And that has its positives, but it has a lot of negatives that come with it as well. Honestly, it took me about 20 years being in this business. I kid you not, I'm embarrassed to admit it. It took about 20 years or close to 20 years to start to figure out highest and best use, for example, to start figuring out why the cost approach is so essential and tells us so much. Market research, folks, I did it, but I didn't do it to the extent that I do it now. I've learned a lot over the years, and that's unfortunate because the appraisal process and the appraisal form, yes, we conflate the two, but they are separate things. The process that you go through to do an appraisal and the form or the type of reporting that you do on that process can be miles apart. Now, they definitely should be related, right? I mean, we still have a obligation, if you will, to not be misleading, to make sure that we are doing things appropriately. But a restricted report is very different than a narrative report. And a narrative report is very different than a drive-by report. Now, when I say drive-by report, be careful there, right? Again, sometimes we conflate a drive-by appraisal with a drive-by report. And when I say drive-by report, I'm talking about a 2055, a form that was set up specifically for that scope of work. And here's the key, folks. When you perform an appraisal on a 2055, it is expected that you did not inspect, measure, take photos of the interior of the property. It is expected that you drove by and took a picture from the road. That's the way the certifications are set up. That's the way the form is set up. Notice it doesn't have anything, it doesn't report floor coverings, for example, on that form, because the scope of work is supposed to match the form that you do them on. And so where Joe and I agree on pretty much everything in his email, one thing that I would push a little further on is helping listeners, helping appraisers to understand, again, the importance of scope of work. Right? Because when he says you don't need an original photo for a hybrid, that may be true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't get an original photo for hybrids. Okay, let me back up. Just because a lender says that you don't have to do something does not necessarily mean that you should not. Let me give you an example in our office, and this is just policy. In our office, if the home is, and the subject is what I'm talking about here, if the subject is 3 years old or less, we have a policy at Appraisal Precision that we will do the cost approach. Now, we may not necessarily include it in the report. That's beside the point. But we're going to do the cost approach. I know some that will do it if it's 10 years or less, right? And by the way, I will do it if I believe it is beneficial, which may include beyond 3 years, but that's the bare minimum. And my point is there are several lenders that I work for, several clients that I work for that do not require the cost approach. But I'll be damned if I'm going to turn in a report on a 1-year-old home and not do the cost approach and probably include it in the report. But Dustin, the lender says you don't have to do it. Beside the point, folks. Beside the point. And I'm using this example to dovetail into the importance of comp photos and driving the neighborhood. And I've always, you know this, folks, I have been consistent in my feelings about comp photos. I don't like them. I think that most of the time they're a waste of time. But notice what I just said there. Most of the time, they're a waste of time. Not all of the time are they a waste of time. And whenever I put out there and say, comp photos seem like a waste of time, I always get the haters that come back and say, well, Dustin, what if you drove the neighborhood and you found a big cell tower in the back of the house that was cut out in the MLS? Okay, yeah, good point. Well, Dustin, what if you're not familiar with the neighborhood? Yeah, excellent point. And in those cases, I would say go drive the neighborhood. If you don't know enough about your neighborhoods to know where the cell towers are, or the ones that back up to Walmart or the railroad track, and you can't get that information from the aerial photos, then by golly, go drive the neighborhood. I'm serious. And folks, I've been doing this for 26 years in the same area, and there's areas that I don't know as well that I would not feel comfortable doing an appraisal if I didn't get in my little car and drive around and take note of what's going on in that neighborhood. My point is this. I've never said that comp photos are not necessary. What I have said for years is that comp photos are mostly not necessary. I'll tell you what is necessary is the ability for you to manage your entire appraisal office and know what's going on from start to finish. Let me give you an example. Just before I came on the air today, I received an email from one of my employees who asked a question about a report. And the first thing that I did, and it's usually the first thing that I always do when I receive these types of emails, is I went on ANOW. Within seconds, I had everything I needed to know about that report. Before I could even answer the question, I need to know, first of all, who's the report assigned to? Who's the lender? What's the scope of work? What's the order look like? Have we inspected it? Have we not inspected it? Where are we at in the process? What documents do I need from the work file? Folks, every one of those questions and more were answered for me in ANOW alone. I didn't have to go to any other place to find that information. It was all right there in ANOW. Folks, this is the type of software that you want to work with, software that works with you to help you to do more with less. It's ANOW, and you can find out more at anow.com. Welcome back to the program, everybody. We're talking comp photos again. We're talking comp photos again. I want to make it very clear, folks, I've never said that comp photos are not necessary. I've never said that we should not be getting original comp photos. What I said was most of the time they're not necessary. I cannot tell you how often I drive around in these rural areas of Idaho and I take 7 quote-unquote comp photos and 5 of them are mailboxes and or private property signs do not pass. I will shoot you. I'm not kidding, folks. 5 out of 7. I've zoomed in as far as I can and there's so much trees and vegetation I'm seeing part of a roof. Yeah, gee, that was worth the drive, right? Now, are there times that comp photos are necessary? Of course there are. But here's what I've advocated from the very beginning. The decision on the scope of work with regard to comp photos should be the appraiser's. And I'll even go so far as to say if you're doing a hybrid appraisal, you're doing a desktop appraisal, there may be a need for you to jump in your car and go drive around. Now, I don't think probably most of the time that's the case, but don't allow whatever the lender ordered to dictate what is required and what is not. I am not a big fan of comp photos. Most of the time, I think it is a waste of my time. Let me repeat that. Most of the time, I believe that driving comp photos is a waste of time. It's there because of a trust issue. It's a trust issue that our clients have with appraisers. Did you really go out there and drive the neighborhood? Well, folks, shouldn't that be up to the appraiser? Just as the same argument I would make for trainees in the field without their supervisor in tow. You can make all kinds of arguments as to why it's not wise to have a trainee out there doing an inspection without the mentor by their side. And I would say there's just as many arguments to advocate for it. But in the end, here's the commonality between that and comp photos and any other scope of work issue. It should be the appraiser's decision, not the lender. Folks, we decide our scope of work. Yes, we talk to our lender. Yes, we talk to our client and find out what they need. Folks, I had somebody call up the office the other day and order a divorce appraisal and they wanted a letter report, a restricted report. Folks, we talked them out of it. We talked them out of it because for their scope of work, it was not enough. And this is how we did it. We said, ma'am, if this goes to, it won't go to litigation. It won't go to court. Okay, but if it does, this report will be torn apart on the stand because there's nothing there, right? It's all in our work file. So in this case, where it's a divorce situation, we're going to push to have this thing done on a regular GPAR form, right? In other words, the appraiser is deciding the scope of work ultimately and whether or not that scope of work works for the problem that they're trying to solve. Folks, it's no different when it comes to comp photos, in my opinion. That should be up to the appraiser, right? And Joe, I hear you, man. With the advent of the hybrid appraisals, right, and by the way, as of this recording, just a couple of weeks ago, FHFA passed a ruling that indicated that desktop appraisals can be done for even purchase mortgage transactions. So that's a permanent thing moving forward, right? That's a big deal, folks. Do I agree with Joe that takes all of the arguments for comp photos and kind of flushes them down the toilet? Yeah, I would say kind of. It does. Not fully. I still think there is need for it in some places, but it should be up to the appraiser. Tell me I'm wrong. Help argue the other side. I'm open, folks. Jump on the website, jump on this episode, comment below. Would love to hear your arguments. Folks, I love these types of discussions. We're having these types of discussions all the time in my private Facebook page at the All-Star Team. Check us out by going to theappraisercoach.com/memberships and find out more about the All-Star Team.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit theappraisercoach.com and sign up for the All-Star Team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.
I'm just going to read to you the paragraph that I think applies to this situation, and then we're going to talk about this. He says, Dustin, with the editor.